Thank you. I really appreciate you all coming out after what I'm sure was a really late night. I just flew in from New York yesterday because I was, like she said, at the Tribeca Film Festival. And although I do stand at the intersection of all of these things, I have to say straight up that my background is in film. And I still mostly speak at film conferences, and it always makes me a little bit nervous when I talk about this stuff in front of technologists and designers and people in the interactive space, because with filmmakers, it's kind of in some ways an easy audience, because I can say, you can do this with the web, and everyone goes, ooh. And I have a feeling you guys might be a little bit of a tougher room, but I've been running the digital initiatives department at the Tribeca Film Festival for 4 years. Before I came on board there was no digital initiatives department. We weren't really making anything particularly interactive. And it's been a totally amazing ride for me. And I feel like I have just learned so much about what is possible for storytelling when you bring storytelling, technology, and design together. But it's also more than that. What I want to talk about today is a little bit more about how it's actually kind of fundamentally changed the way I think about what storytelling does, and kind of becoming more involved in the world of, and now it's all bright again, becoming more involved in the world of maker culture, going to hackathons and kind of being really embraced by the tech community has really, for me, been a profound shift in this idea that you can take things apart and put them back together again. And I think that as filmmakers, and I don't know how many of you in the room are filmmakers, we tend to be a little bit tech-phobic in some ways, and so we feel like we're constantly at the mercy of technology and at the mercy of algorithms. So this idea that I, with my very, very limited, coding ability, can actually do stuff was a really huge thing for me when I first started doing that. So that has been a really profound change, as much as actually creating these new kinds of projects. I just wanted to start with this quote from Frank Rose, who wrote this really awesome book. And if you're interested in the space of interactive storytelling, I highly recommend it. It's called The Art of Immersion. We stand now at the intersection of lure and blur. The future beckons, but we're already partway through inventing it. For me, this sort of lure and blur is very much how I feel about all of this. Like, I can sort of see the vague outlines of something changing, but it's really, really messy. And when I was thinking about this talk, I really wanted to have one of those really concise talks, with like a really punchy title, and then all the slides would kind of be feeding into this like one big idea. But I realized actually I can't really do that at the moment, because my adventures in interactive storytelling are messy, inherently messy. And actually what this has done for me and for many of the filmmakers and creators I work with is it's really kind of like complicated their practice, their art practice. Because they used to be, filmmakers, and they made films, okay, increasingly on video, but fundamentally there was a process, and you worked with the same kinds of film teams. You had producers and camera people and editors, and everyone knew what that was. And it was very hard to make a good film, but you fundamentally knew what the timeline looked like. You knew who the team was. Now that's not the case. Now we're working with interaction designers, and we're working with developers, and it's really completely different. The timeline's very different. Jason Brush, a really cool designer who works at Possible, I think this is a little bit simplifying the process, but he was saying that film is much more of a waterfall process, whereas now we're having to work much more iteratively, and it is much more agile. And of course, we mess up all those terms, so please don't quote me on this. But I think that is true. We're being forced to work in a completely different way, and it makes us very, very uncomfortable. But I do think it's really, really important to remind ourselves that this is not new. It's exponentially faster, and it's changing all the time now with the web. But technology has always changed how we see and talk about the world. From cave paintings to pencils to the invention of the printing press. And I constantly think about the fact that, when sync sound was invented, for example, it completely changed how you would make documentaries, because before sync sound, you had to record the sound separately from the picture. So, I'm always thinking about, I have this picture up on my desk at work, this idea of how being able to fly to the moon and then take a photograph, so lots of technologies there in the space shuttle, but then also in the camera, fundamentally changed how we saw the Earth and our place on the Earth, because we suddenly saw ourselves as this tiny little fragile planet, and I think it was a huge disruption in terms of how we saw ourselves as human beings on the Earth. So I guess always taking the technology out of the process is quite important for me, because I think that there's a certain amount of hubris when you get too stuck in what technology can do, because it's so, so bright, shiny object, and it's so wonderful for filmmakers especially to have this whole new toolbox at their disposal. But you can kind of forget that this has always been a process, an ongoing process, and also that technology can't fix everything. I love this cartoon that a doctor friend of mine gave me. And I think it just reminds us that there are certain things that technology is obviously awesome to show you the broken rib, but there are certain things you have to do to fix the broken rib. So kind of taking everything with a little bit of a pinch of salt and always constantly thinking about the sort of long trajectory of technology in our lives. I mean, and when I say long, I mean going way back to when we first started painting on cave walls is important, because I think otherwise we get kind of a little bit stuck in the constant now. But that said, in the last 5 years, my life has completely changed, and so has a lot of the lives of many of the creators that I now work with, as they've moved from just the camera and the nonlinear editing system to a completely new toolbox. I'm just going to show you a little clip from TFI Interactive, which is a tech conference, storytelling tech conference that I run at the Tribeca Film Festival. I started doing this just to kind of show people all these ideas that I was coming across in my work, to get them a little bit excited about what this kind of like massive new kind of mush-up of disciplines can lead to. So this is a little clip from Saturday, just happened.
I kind of want to talk to you today about the audience. This is sort of the first time that the audience is actually aware of the audience. And that's really incredible.
So this morning I'm going to talk to you about the Internet of Things. What happens when everything in your house can know about how it's being used?
The difference between a TV and a web browser is that the web browser knows who you are, right?
Today, I think we're confronted with a very, very different notion of what reality is. The virtual games we play online are just as real as the physical moments of our lives.
The process of actually manipulating video and turning it into something else is very intimidating. You want to make it more playful, you want to make it more fun.
3, 2, 1. Yeah! If you have interactivity in your work, you're making an aesthetic statement with it, right? Because the interactivity is part of your story.
This question of timelessness. What are the things from this age that we're living in that will survive?
We had no idea this was ever going to work when it was kind of a few years ago when we started making it, and 2.5 years later, we're here.
Games shouldn't do this alone, because this is all just interactivity.
This actually takes time. There's no shortcut to doing that. You can't pay for it with money. You just have to do it.
We're hoping that this will be the beginning of a national and global conversation to create stories that are worth remembering. Thank you.
So that clip that you saw of the people with the little sensors on their heads and the balloons was called the Emotional Arcade. I don't know if any of you saw it at South by Southwest, but this is a game that an artist called Brent Hoff, who is also a filmmaker, invented, where you have to blow up a balloon with a number, I think there's 4 emotions. There's rage, there's lust, there's bliss, and there's fear. And you compete against other people to blow up the balloon first. And what was really interesting is I saw filmmakers and people from Tribeca coming into the space and just kind of looking really confused and thinking, why is this in the space alongside the Oculus Rift, alongside that little robot you saw? And I honestly don't have an answer for that. But I know that there's something going on, and I think a lot of what this is there's this huge slippage between disciplines happening right now. And I know in my space, for example, it's much harder for me to say when I fund interactive documentary work, but it's much harder. In the old days, I would have just gone to the film community and said, hey, we've got a fund, apply to us. But now I'm going to a much wider community than just the film community. I'm going to creative technologists. I'm going to the sort of people that you might see at FITC or IO. It's a really different community, and we don't necessarily go to each other's conferences, and we don't necessarily talk to each other. So it's very weird. It's like this weird sort of liminal space right now, which I think is going back to that quote from Frank Rose, this idea of the lure and the blur. And we're kind of in that blur right now, or at least I feel like I'm in that blur. And I know sometimes, I'll go to conferences where there are no filmmakers at all. And in fact, actually, a lot of my work started because I went years ago to South by Southwest in 2004, and I just wandered into the interactive conference, and I thought, this is so relevant for filmmakers. Why are there no filmmakers in the space? Like, it's just crazy that we're not in the space. We should be in the space. And that's really what got me interested in the possibilities of all of this. But it is messy, and the messiness I think you'll see throughout this. So the first talk we had at TFI Interactive was from Kenyatta Cheese, who was talking about this idea of the audience now having an audience. So the audience can build communities around TV shows like Doctor Who. They can speak to each other. They can form communities around whatever interests them. And this is obviously very, very different to actually you can see the TV screen, the old one-to-many relationship that we had with media. But it does also go back to this idea of the Greek audience, where the audience did face each other. So, and I know I'm not the first person to say this, it is worth acknowledging that the last 120 years since the invention of film has been a little bit of a blip in the sense that the audience hasn't really been involved. And so one of the most profound changes for me is not really on the creative side, although that is massive. It's on the audience side. It's what the audience can do now and who the audience are speaking to when they have technology at their disposal that is global, ubiquitous, and cheap. One of the examples that Kenyatta showed, which I just loved, was this photograph of the woman and the bear. I'm sure lots of you have seen this. And someone wrote there underneath, this would be a great cartoon. And next thing you know, you've got Miss Officer and Mr. Shuffles. And it wasn't a cartoon, but then people started making parodies of what they thought was the real cartoon, and it became this massive thing on the web. There's actually even a theme song for a non-existent cartoon. And he was using this as an example to just show how quickly these kinds of memes can spread, but also how creative they can be and how creative the audience can be. And I think about this a lot, as well as that community, when I was talking about the community that I go to when I'm looking for people to reach out to for the funding. It's also the professional versus amateur, creative versus audience dichotomy, which is now much more blurry too, because obviously, as you all know, the audience are not only talking back, but they're actually creating some very beautiful media while they talk back. But looking at the creators for a minute, one of the things that has fundamentally changed the way that we work now when we think about storytelling with technology is this idea of the interaction as the story. This has come up a number of times, but actually even going back to 2008. And I should say, for those of you working in interactive arts, this is very new for us. I'd say that really this work only really started in earnest in the film world around 2007-08. There were obviously projects before that, but really it was around 2008, and this was one of the very first projects, Gaza Zerot. It was about life in a town in Gaza and a town in Israel, and you could basically move between the two over 30 days. And whichever side you looked at, the other side would always be visible. It would just fade a little bit. So it was this idea of the border down the middle, and then the other always being there, the other always being present. And this was the first time, I think, for a lot of people that they thought about this idea of something that couldn't be downloaded and then experienced. This, at the time, this was how we sort of defined it. If you could download it and watch it offline, then that wasn't the same. That was kind of losing the affordances of the web, and that was a different kind of project. And I think this project in particular really opened our eyes to what happens when the interaction is the story. We recently did a hackathon in New York, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the hackathons and how we run them later. But this was a guy, Brett Gaylor, who works with Mozilla, and he wanted to use what was then Collusion and is now Lightbeam, that allows you to see how you're being tracked on the web, to create this project called Do Not Track. I'm not going to play it now just for time, but basically this is a demo. It's pretty rough at the moment. He's developing it. As you watch the film, you are being tracked. So it's about being tracked. It's getting people aware of how they are tracked, but you get tracked as you watch it, and then at the end you can see how you've been tracked and how all the sites are linking to each other. And Ben Moskowitz, also from Mozilla, just spoke at TFI Interactive, and he was saying to the filmmakers, and a lot of filmmakers were really angry about this, that you need to think more like advertisers because you are being tracked online. The Nike ad will show you red red running shoes. If they think you're going to like red better than purple, and filmmakers better get clued into that. And he showed Take This Lollipop as an example of a powerful way of sort of personalizing your media experience. And a lot of people were really, really freaked out. But like he said, you can be freaked out or not, but it's happening. And maybe it's better that you are in that space. And I think that's one of the things I think about a lot is I think we sometimes tend to be a little bit like, if we don't like something, we're like, okay, well, we'll just leave them to it. But we all need to be in that space. space so that we can create the kind of culture we want in the space. So we've been really excited about projects like this. Tom Igoe also just spoke at TFI Interactive and was talking about how, as designers, we spend too much time asking what the stuff will do, but not enough time asking what the people will do. And this is another fundamental change for us, is we never had to think about user experience design. We never really needed to think about what the audience was doing because we kind of knew what they were doing. They were either in front of their TV at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night watching the documentary that we had broadcast, through a TV station, or they were in the cinema where we had sold them a ticket. Hopefully they weren't eating popcorn too loudly, but we fundamentally knew what they were doing. That's not the case anymore. So this kind of need to look at both what the stuff is and what the stuff is doing, but also what the people are doing with that stuff is a really huge jump for us, and none of us 10 years ago, we're really thinking about user experience design, interaction design, any of that stuff at all. So it's been a massive, massive jump for us, and we're really having to think about things like medium as behavior and what that means in terms of the work that we make and how people find that work, or interaction design as shaping digital things for people's use. Because like I said before, they weren't really using it. They were sitting back and hopefully being quiet and watching the 70-minute film. There was no real use of it. And so this is a really interesting comment that Jason Brush, the designer I mentioned, brought up, that with film, it was much more about the passing of time. Editing is really about sculpting time. And films, the technique of film is really how you sculpt time over the 70-minute duration. But now we're really shaping for use, and that's a fundamental shift in everything. It's a shift in how you have to think as a creator. It's a shift in terms of the team you need to work with, and it's a huge shift in terms of your relationship with the audience and what that looks like. So we've had a couple of projects that we've funded that I think have started to really think about what this means for interactive film, or film doesn't even really make sense anymore. Half the projects we use, obviously they don't have film. A lot of them don't even have video. Interactive projects. One that we funded a couple of years ago, Alma, was actually partly produced by Upien, who did Gaza Zerot, one of the original projects that I showed you. And what Alma is that you can view it on the desktop, but you can in the browser, but you can also download it as an iPad app. And if you want to check it out, it's a free iPad app. I recommend it on an iPad because what it is it's a two-screen experience where it's a confession of a ex-Guatemalan gang member. That's her there. And it's either very, very close up, very, very personal interview with her, or you can see video footage and photographs from the stories she's describing. And you can sort of choose which one you want to see. If you see her, there's no real soundtrack, but if you scroll down, you also get a soundtrack. So it's a video and an audio experience. And it's actually very interesting how audio has become so important with a lot of these projects. And for those of you who know the NFB interactive projects, you'll notice how key audio is to the work that they do. If you look at something like Bear 71, it's really hard, obviously, to get people's attention online. It's a very, very different relationship you have when you're watching footage online and you've got all the distractions of your Skype popping up and emails and whatnot, than watching something in a cinema, obviously. And one of the ways that I think creators have found to kind of overcome that a little bit is by trying to pull people in through the audio. And Chris Milk, actually, who made Wilderness Downtown, he made a really interesting point about how when you put your headphones on, it's completely seamless. There's something very seamless about that experience of audio through headphones, whereas anything in front of our eyes always feels very jarring. Even something like the Oculus, it doesn't feel like you're looking at reality. You feel like you're looking at virtual reality. And so what is it about the audio that can actually pull us into a world, whereas we always feel like with visuals that we're being cheated a little bit, which I thought was a very interesting point. Another project, Hollow, HollowDocumentary.com, which only works on Chrome right now. I think Safari as well, is a project. It's a long scroll website, or what people are calling scrolly telling. God, I hate, sometimes I catch myself saying these words and I just think, oh no. But yes, scrolly telling. It's a beautiful experience, taking you through the small town in Appalachia. It's really about, not Appalachia, sorry, West Virginia. It's really about what is happening to small towns all over America, but it's also about the concept of home. And she actually created this incredibly universal experience through the story of one very, very small town, and created a beautiful story experience at the same time. But with all these digital tricks that we now have, with the storytelling and the two-screen experiences, one of the things that's actually become really key to us is this idea of going back to analog. You can see I still have my paper here, because one of the things we think about a lot is also digital access and who gets to tell stories and who gets to hear those stories, and also how you can mix digital and analog to create a really dynamic experience. I think when we first started, we were so swept up in this idea of creating digital projects that we kind of forgot about this idea of actually bringing people in through analog and digital together. This is Jonathan Harris at TFI Interactive on Saturday. He brought along this bird, which he said represented to him something really beautiful. You know, you just pull the string and the bird flaps its wings, because it's timeless, because this bird could have been created 2,000 years ago, and it could be created 1,000 years in the future. It's made out of such basic materials, and that software is never going to become obsolete. And you know, we're thinking a lot right now about a lot of the stories that we created a few years ago no longer run properly. He was actually showing some of his older projects, you know, that don't work quite so well anymore. So this idea of timelessness versus timeliness is something that we think about a lot, because we're thinking about creating art. And obviously we want the art to be something that people will be looking at many years from now. And it's a bit of a, you know, there's tension there, because we're not archiving this stuff very well. You know, it's only really in the last few years that we realized something was even happening in interactive storytelling. And we haven't really been telling the story of what we've been doing. But if any of you are interested in that, I highly recommend checking out the MIT Open Doc Lab. MIT have been doing a really extraordinary job of at least trying to pull all these projects together and create, if not an archive, then at least a place where you can find out about what's out there right now and the history of that. So they have this thing called DocuBase, where you can look at a bunch of different projects. And they also have another site which is really awesome called Moments of Innovation, which traces current projects back into you know, the last 100, 200 years of media making to show the historic roots of them. So when we're thinking about analog, we're thinking about things like, you know, how do you reach people with the stories you're telling? We have a project around the rights of domestic care workers, like nannies, caregivers, people who tend to work in the home and tend to not be covered very well by the law in terms of their employment rights. So they actually created a nanny van, which drives around the US and has pop-up screenings and delivers the message that way. We also have a project called Immigrant Nation, which has just launched online. But in order to spread the story about these immigration stories, they launched at Ellis Island, and a lot of it was very analog. It was actually getting people to write their stories on paper. So coupling the digital and the analog for a lot of these projects is really, really important, because we sometimes really take for granted who is actually checking out these projects. A, finding out about them in the first place, and B, who has access to the web. So this is something that we think about a lot. One of the first projects we supported was actually a very, very interactive project. They actually built a bespoke platform for it called 18 Days in Egypt. It was pulling in all these stories around social media from the revolution in Egypt. But again, what they realized is actually a lot of people in Egypt who had the best stories weren't online, and they weren't actually recording things with their phones. They weren't on Twitter, they weren't on YouTube. And so they actually had communities going out in the streets with iPads who would then collect those stories. So being a little bit sensitive to who has what technology and who gets to tell those stories is key. That said, we are getting some really extraordinary stories from around the world now. This is a project that we did in the Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya, and it's actually built on the Tumblr platform, and it's built in such a way that refugees in the camp who can't leave the camp can actually upload their own stories using semi-smartphones. And more, we're actually doing a lot of projects in the developing world with smartphones as there's increasing proliferation. Mozilla have, a new smartphone, which I think is going to be $25. This is fundamentally changing the storytelling landscape, as you can imagine. And so we're really tapping into that. We've just funded a project called Logs of War about resource extraction in Africa. And it's a film, but there's also an app that goes alongside it called This Is My Backyard, which allows people, activists on the ground in Africa, to log the stories of resource extraction in their own communities. And that's being built at the moment. There's obviously huge security issues around it, so they're still working on that. But coupling film with interactive apps is something that we're doing more and more. We also funded a project called Map Your World, which allows children to map their own communities with phones. But there was also a film that started the whole project off. So what's really interesting is filmmakers are making films, and then through making the film, they're realizing that there are these tools that don't exist, and then they're going on to become tool builders, which isn't what we initially set up the fund to support, but it's something that just ended up happening, and that's happened more and more and more. We have a project right now called Promise Tracker, which came out of a film called American Promise about two African-American parents who sent their child, a boy, to a very good private school, and basically when he hit his teens, he started falling behind. And so they were trying to figure out, they were talking about the black male achievement gap in America, but now what they've done is they've built an app, or they're building an app right now called Promise Tracker, which allows parents to basically set goals for their kids and work with their kids, through those difficult years to try and resolve some of those issues. So in order to do all of this, in order to find these projects, in order to get these projects built, in order to have filmmakers work with developers and designers, we had to build a community of interactive storytellers, and we had to find out who these technologists and designers were, who we could work with, because like I said before, we weren't really mixing, we weren't in the same world, and there was a little bit of a translation issue between us. This is a really, really, terribly hackneyed comparison between some tech language and some film language. But just, to illustrate the fact that for us, it was terrifying. Like, we were terrified of code, terrified. We were terrified of anything that wasn't something that we understood, and we just didn't really know how to move into that space. We kind of felt like computers were full of scary stuff. And we needed someone to hold our hand. And actually, one of my jobs fundamentally now really has become to be that hand holder. I'm not a technologist, but I kind of know how to do the translation now. But in the early days, we just couldn't figure out how to do it. Like, it was just so slow. We were begging people to work on our projects. We didn't know who the good technologists were. Even when we found them, we didn't know how to describe what we wanted because we didn't know what the code could do. We just didn't know what was possible. And so what we started doing is a series of hackathons, storytelling hackathons specifically. And these were really interesting new mixes. This is one we just did at CERN in Geneva. We took a bunch of scientists from CERN and we mixed them with storytellers and technologists, and we got them to make a project about science. And just throwing people together and making them think about ways of working together has actually been incredibly useful for us. I'm very, very aware of what hackathons can be good for and not so good for. But for us, just getting people in a room and getting them to talk to each other in an environment that we make really, really fun and supportive has been absolutely huge. The other thing that's been really key for us is we make them really diverse. It's really important that we have a lot of women in the room, that we have a lot of old people, that we have a lot of young people. We just try and mix it up as much as possible so it feels really, really welcoming, because we feel like we're building this from the ground up. So this is a really good time to make sure that those things are in place, that everyone feels like they can be part of these hackathons, and that whatever skill you bring into that space, you will be valued. And it took us a while to get there. One of the stupid mistakes we made at the beginning is we never had designers. And it turned out that the projects looked like they didn't have designers. So we learned along the way how to run hackathons well. It's definitely been a steep learning curve. I'm going to skip this video. The videos are all online. Of all the hackathons we've done. So every time we do a hackathon, we should do a lot of sharing back so that we can really share what we've learned to the larger community, not just to the people who are in that room. And the other really cool thing about hackathons is they've really allowed us to experiment with things that we're interested in. So, I was thinking, why don't documentary filmmakers specifically care about data? Journalists are all over data now. They know that they need to care about data. Documentary filmmakers should too, but there was just no interest. So we paired up with some folks up in Chicago, and we did a data hackathon with storytellers in Chicago. We also recently did a hardware hackathon with Alexander Rebin, who's a roboticist at MIT, and we got filmmakers to play with Arduinos and processing, just to get them, used to the idea of how an object might, talk to the computer, but also how they might start to think about objects in their stories. Because increasingly we are seeing projects that are really thinking about stories as software and hardware. One of the projects that came out of the hackathon was this Flappy Bird in a box. So when Flappy Bird was taken off the App Store, this woman decided she was going to build a real version of it. You can see it starting to be built there. So they don't, they don't have to be stories as we traditionally know them. We just want to create these spaces where people can play and think differently about what they normally do. So much of it is about just taking people out of their comfort zones and saying, okay, technologists, you are used to building utilitarian apps that do something. We don't want that. We want a really pointless story that's not going to do anything other than delight someone. Go. So it's really just helping people to work together to create new kinds of projects. And then finally, one of the other things that's been really important for me is actually showing this work, because getting it built and funded is a huge problem. But the other problem is we don't really have any infrastructure around this. There aren't any critics who are assigned to talk about interactive storytelling. The film reviewers don't think it's part of their job. And neither do the tech reviewers. So we're kind of like falling into the middle of this liminal space. So one of the things we're trying to do is build an infrastructure around that, so we can kind of say, look what we're doing, and do you think it's interesting? So we started actually showing work at the Tribeca Film Festival in this new section called Storyscapes. So it's kind of like the short film section or the documentary section. It's a juried section of the festival. We started last year. This was a project called Blabjoy. That's actually Alexander Rebin, the roboticist on the right. The guy on the left is Brent Hoff, who did Emotional Arkaden, which I was describing with the balloons. So what's interesting, actually, is all these weird projects and all these people who are now slipping between disciplines, who are starting as filmmakers and suddenly building emotional arcades. I am starting to see that there are these weird links growing. There is a community building around this, because people they're making the work, for one thing, and it's always been about the work, more than anything. They're making the work, but they are also starting to step between disciplines a little bit more comfortably, which is really, really exciting to see. So Blabjoy, this was a little robot that made a documentary. The filmmakers, I keep messing up my words. The creators were really interested in Eliza. Do you remember Eliza, one of the really early bots that would, it was like your therapist, and it would always say, don't be so negative, which I thought was hilarious when I was a kid. And they were really interested in the fact that people still confess really crazy stuff to Eliza. And people open up to computers. And so they thought, what if, documentary storytellers want people to open up. So what if we had a really cute robot? This is the most manipulative project ever, by the way. This robot has the voice of a 10-year-old, slightly tweaked. So it's a really cute voice. And the face is based on a baby seal, the wide-spaced eyes. It's basically based so that you will trust it and then tell it your deepest, darkest secrets. They are basically evil, those two. You can kind of tell. So people would confess their deepest, darkest secrets. And the footage was incredible. I mean, it was a little jolty sometimes because people would be holding the robot in their hands. But really, really interesting footage. So this was something from last year. This year I managed to get Robert De Niro on the Oculus Rift, for which I am forever, I will forever be proud. So we had a project called Clouds, which some of you may know. Clouds is a project, basically it's about creative technologists. And it was built using the RGBD toolkit, which hacks Connect to a camera. So it's using generative code to talk about the creative potential of code. And I had these guys actually come and talk at TFI Interactive last year. I was determined to have it in the space because for me, this project more than anything really summed up the exciting possibilities right now. And you've got amazing people, speaking in the documentary, people like Casey Reyes and Zach Lieberman, all these people who have really inspired me and made me think differently about what code can do and made me think about code as being this really creative tool. So we had Clouds in an installation environment where you would direct it with a Kinect, and also on the Oculus Rift. We had a couple of other projects on the Oculus because we were really trying to show the film potential. There isn't that much really great shot video on the Oculus right now because it's really hard to stitch it up. It's much easier to do it with CGI. But we had another project called Rise, which is going to be part of a short film. And then Strangers, which is this incredible music video, which I think was shot in Montreal. And then we had Noni de la Peña. This is her with, sorry about the bad photo quality. This is called Use of Force. She actually worked initially with Palmer, who went on to found Oculus. But she has her own head-mounted gear so that you can actually walk around, because right now with Oculus, I think that makes you a little sick. And this is actually telling the story of a migrant who was killed on the US border by US Border Patrol. He was tasered and beaten to death. And it was witnessed by all these people. And Noni de la Peña does this thing she calls immersive journalism. So she basically puts you on scene and she recreates the scene. And so you can basically see what the witnesses saw. And so she's really experimenting with this idea of if you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, would you act differently? It's a really powerful experience. And then just because people needed to be cheered up after that, we had this lovely project called On a Human Scale, where every note of the piano was a different New Yorker singing. And you could play New York, and it was just really delightful. When we had, I couldn't get the video to work this morning, I'm afraid, but we actually had musicians come in and play alongside it. And the guy who was playing the piano basically played it like a choir. It was totally beautiful. And because all these New Yorkers were filmed at different times of day, there were all these stories around the singers as well. And people became really obsessed with individual singers. There's this guy, if you can see the guy in the middle row there, he's called Xavier. When he sings, he kind of moves forward and everyone was obsessed with him. So it became this really lovely thing about the accessibility. The technology is kind of a little bit hidden, and this is something that we deal with all the time, is the technology getting in the way. I think because we're still very new to this space, we haven't quite figured out how to kind of get the technology out of the way. It's still very much front and center of a lot of these projects, and not to say that the technology wouldn't be there, but it's that kind of idea of once you get used to it, it gets out of the way, and we're not quite there yet. This was another project by the NFB, who, as many of you know, does some of the most incredible interactive work. This is a new project by Stan Douglas on the right. This is Lockdown from the NFB Digital Studio called Circa 1948, which is now available. You can download it on an iPad. They actually did this incredible projection mapping on 4 walls with Memo Aiken. So you could actually move through these 2 areas of Vancouver that no longer exist. It was really kind of amazing. And then finally we had a performance, because I'm really interested in this idea of why is theatre so, why is immersive theatre so huge right now? Things like Punch Drunk, Sleep No More. There's this really interesting thing happening around audiences' desire to participate and be with other people. And we had this great project called Choose Your Own Documentary, this is Nathan Pennington. He's an obsessive, he'll freely admit that. He bought all these old Choose Your Own Adventure books from eBay, and then he found a diary in one of them, and he became obsessed with tracking down the guy who wrote the diary. But the audience gets to vote. There's 1,526 variations, and there's 5 different endings. So every time you see it, it's a different performance. And he performs alongside video. So it's a film, it's theatre, and the audience gets to vote. So when I saw that, I was like, wow, this just kind of has a little bit of everything. It's also really moving. And one of the things that comes up a lot, one of the questions I get asked all the time is, can you make interactive work that makes people cry? I still haven't had that transcendent experience that I get in a movie theater. I haven't had that experience that a film gives me yet. But I do think we're getting closer. I think a lot of it is just because we've been in that montage moment where we're experimenting with a cut. And now we're getting to the point where we're really starting to experiment with the storytelling. And it's just taking us a little while to get there. So just to end with a little quote, because I think that we have to kind of stay on our toes in this space. It's really, really hard to know whether you're just dabbling with the newest thing and it's going to be a passing fad, or whether something really cool is coming down the pipeline. I'm kind of I'm just laying down my cards and saying something really cool is coming, and I want to be part of that. And you can't really, if you ask people, you're not necessarily going to get the right answer. Henry Ford, who invented the Model T, I think that's really true. People would never have imagined the motor car. They would have imagined faster horses. And actually what's really interesting is when they did invent the motor car, people referred to them as horseless carriages. So, we're fundamentally always being pulled back into the past while we're rushing into the future. So just to kind of remember that, but also be open to experimentation, I think is really key. This is the quote that I end all my talks with. It drives everyone crazy, but I think it's true, so I always put it up. Tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, involve me and I will understand. I think interactive storytelling gives us that opportunity more than anything else. And it's one of the things that makes me the most excited about it, is that you truly can involve the audience. You can also work with the audience in terms of the stories that get created. And that is time. Thanks. So if anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer any, except I can't see anything. No?
You talked about some examples of interesting work from hackathons, but you also mentioned that hackathons work for everything.
Yeah.
Could you maybe give some examples of something you learned that hackathons just don't work?
Well, I think, I think like anything, the hackathons became very popular, and then everyone wanted to do a hackathon. And I have to say, actually, I've noticed that every time I go and talk to a film festival or any, film organization, they say, "Can we do a hackathon with you?" And I'm just like, why? Like, I mean, not that I wouldn't do it, but why do you want to? Like, what are your goals for the hackathon? For us, one of the things that we really emphasize is process over product. I don't care if the products that come out of the hackathons never go anywhere. Like, that's not why we do them. We do them because we want the process to be rich and rewarding. We want those people to maybe go on to work together, which has happened actually a lot. We want those communities to meet each other and continue to work together. And we want everyone, not just the filmmakers, we want everyone to rethink how they work and rethink who they might work with. So that's why we do them. But I mean, the idea that you're going to get a beautiful product, especially out of one of our hackathons where, we really do emphasize creativity, not perfect products.
And it's only a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, we usually do 2 days. We've started doing more and more 5-day hackathons, but it's a huge commitment of time. And the other thing is you are asking people to give up their time for free. We feed people, we occasionally will fly people in, but fundamentally they're still working for free, and they're working on other people's projects a lot as well. And so we're just really respectful of what that means, So that's why I think hackathons can be amazing if you have really clear goals and you look after everyone. I think they can be really exploitative if you don't. One more question, anyone? Yeah?
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier regarding, I guess, preserving interactive experiences.
Yeah.
The strengths that can be, make them in the future. And I have heard that is a problem with, especially digital interactive experiences where really there isn't a system in place to preserve them as art. So I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah.
How they should be preserved and possibly the technology should try to preserve or perhaps update it instead.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the problem with updating technology is we have a huge issue with funding. I mean, I maybe should have said this at the beginning. I work in the independent film world. We don't have a lot of money. So, like, updating technology is expensive. It's someone's lots of time. So I don't have an answer. I mean, it's really interesting. I heard Paola Antonelli from MoMA talk about when they acquire video games at MoMA, they acquire the code and they preserve it. That's part of their role as a museum. And we don't really have anyone doing that right now for this work. And I really hope I hope that changes. But I mean, the answer is right now, nothing's happening. These projects are just getting lost.
A couple months ago, I was actually at the Science Center game exhibits. And they had it all on the original machines, but so many of them were broken, there were really bugs and everything. This is art that's not being preserved, eventually it's just going to be broken.
Yeah. And it's really sad because if this does become, a new art form, to have lost the beginnings of it, to me would just be like so. Yeah, because you never get, you can't go back. So yeah, I hope someone solves that, but I'm really hoping someone else solves that because I don't know how to do it. Cool. Thank you, everyone.